In the small town of Millbrook, Virginia, Eleanor Hayes had worn black every Sunday for 18 years. The whole congregation knew her story, how her husband Michael disappeared without a trace, leaving her to raise their daughter alone. But what they didn't know was that Eleanor kept his wedding ring in a jewelry box, never quite believing he was truly gone. None of them knew that a single knock on her front door would soon change everything. If you enjoy stories like this, feel free to subscribe. It really helps the channel. By the way, let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Eleanor's modest garden on Maple Street when she heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. At 45, she'd grown accustomed to the quiet rhythms of her solitary life, tending her tomatoes, reading library books on the front porch, waiting for Emma's weekend calls from college. She didn't look up immediately, assuming it was probably Mrs. Henderson from next door coming to borrow something again. The footsteps stopped near her rose bushes, and Eleanor finally glanced over her shoulder. A weathered man in his late 40s stood at the edge of her property, carrying a worn duffel bag that looked like it had seen better days. His hair was streaked with premature gray, his face lined with exhaustion and something that looked like worry. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes that used to make her heart skip, were unmistakable. The watering can slipped from Eleanor's trembling hands, hitting the ground with a metallic clang that seemed to echo in the suddenly still air. "Ellie," he whispered, his voice rougher than she remembered, but achingly familiar. "I know you probably thought I was dead, but I can explain everything." Eleanor's legs felt like they might give out as she stared at the impossible figure standing in her driveway. Michael Hayes, her husband, her heart, the man she'd mourned for nearly 2 decades, looked back at her with desperate uncertainty. Her neighbor's curtains twitched as Mrs. Patterson and the Hendersons pressed their faces to windows, drawn by the commotion. Michael shifted his duffel bag nervously, glancing over his shoulder toward the street, as if expecting someone to follow him. "You look exactly the same," he said softly, taking a tentative step closer to the front porch, where Eleanor stood frozen. "I've thought about this moment every single day." Eleanor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Part of her wanted to run to him, to collapse into his arms like she had in 1,000 dreams. But another part noticed how he kept checking the street, how his clothes looked hastily assembled, how he carried himself like a man still running from something. The sound of a car door slamming made them both turn. Emma Hayes, 19 and radiating the confident energy of a college sophomore, walked up the driveway carrying a weekend bag and wearing the bright smile she always saved for surprise visits home. The smile died on her lips as she spotted the stranger standing near her mother. "Mom?" Emma's voice carried a note of protective concern that had developed over years of being Eleanor's closest companion. "Who is this?" Michael's face crumpled with emotion as he looked at the young woman who had been barely a toddler when he disappeared. "Emma," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm your father." Emma's scream pierced the quiet neighborhood like a siren. "Mom, who is this man?" She dropped her bag and stepped protectively in front of Eleanor, who still hadn't spoken a word. Michael raised his hands in a gesture meant to be calming, but Emma recoiled as if he were dangerous. "Emma, please," Michael pleaded. "I know this is impossible to understand, but I'm telling you the truth. I'm Michael Hayes. I'm your father." Eleanor finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Emma, go inside. I'm not leaving you alone with some crazy person," Emma shot back, pulling out her cell phone. "I'm calling the police." "Don't." The word came out sharper than Michael intended, and both women noticed how his eyes darted nervously toward the street again. "Please, just give me 5 minutes to explain." Eleanor studied his face, searching for proof that this wasn't some elaborate, cruel joke. The scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident was still there. The way he rubbed his thumb against his index finger when nervous, that hadn't changed either. "Come inside," Eleanor said quietly. "But Emma stays with us." In her living room, surrounded by 18 years' worth of photographs showing only Eleanor and Emma, Michael struggled to explain the impossible. His story came out in fragments. Dangerous men, witness protection, having to disappear to keep his family safe. But Eleanor noticed what he wasn't saying. The way his eyes avoided the family photos, the guilty expression that crossed his face whenever Emma asked direct questions. When Emma finally stormed out, declaring she didn't believe a word of it, Eleanor noticed something that made her heart sink. A hospital bracelet was wrapped around Michael's wrist, the kind they use for patients undergoing treatment, dated just 2 weeks ago. "Michael," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "If you were really protecting us all these years, why do you still look so afraid?" The next morning, news of Michael's return spread through Millbrook like wildfire. At Murphy's Diner on Main Street, the usual breakfast crowd buzzed with whispered conversations and stolen glances. Frank Murphy, the diner's burly owner, leaned across the counter to share the latest gossip with Dr. Patricia Collins, Eleanor's closest friend and the town's only physician. "I'm telling you, Doc, something ain't right about this whole situation," Frank muttered, refilling Patricia's coffee cup. "Dead men don't just walk back into town carrying luggage." Patricia stirred her coffee thoughtfully. She'd been Eleanor's confidant through the darkest years after Michael's disappearance, watching her friend struggle with grief while raising Emma alone. "Eleanor's a smart woman, Frank. If she believes it's really him—" "Smart women can be fooled too," interrupted Martha Henley, the town's self-appointed keeper of everyone's business. She slid into the booth next to Patricia, her eyes bright with the thrill of fresh scandal. "I saw him through my kitchen window yesterday evening. That man looks like he's running from something bad. Mark my words." Old Joe Brennan, nursing his third cup of coffee at the corner table, looked up from his newspaper. "Funny thing," he said slowly. "I could have sworn I saw Hayes talking to some strangers in a black sedan down by the old railroad crossing yesterday. Didn't get a good look at the other folks, but they sure didn't look like they were from around here." The diner fell silent as all eyes turned to Joe. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, strangers in black sedans were cause for concern. Patricia felt her stomach tighten with worry for Eleanor. "Joe, are you certain it was him?" "Been living in this town for 73 years, Doc. I know what I saw." Before anyone could respond, Eleanor's phone rang. She'd been sitting quietly in the back booth, trying to process the previous evening's revelations while avoiding the stares of her neighbors. The caller ID showed an unknown number. "Mrs. Hayes?" The voice on the other end was gravelly, unfamiliar, and carried an undertone that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "Has your husband contacted you recently?" Eleanor's hand trembled as she held the phone, the stranger's gravelly voice echoing in her ears. Around her, the diner had fallen completely silent, every patron straining to hear her conversation. "I don't know what you're talking about," Eleanor managed, though her voice betrayed her fear. "Michael Hayes disappeared 18 years ago." "Mrs. Hayes, I think we both know that's not entirely accurate anymore. The voice continued with unsettling calm. We need to have a conversation. Soon. The line went dead, leaving Eleanor staring at her phone in growing panic. Dr. Patricia Collins immediately slid into the booth beside her friend, placing a protective hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Eleanor, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Before Eleanor could answer, the diner's bell chimed as Michael himself walked through the front door, scanning the room until his eyes found hers. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as the man everyone thought was dead approached Eleanor's table. His face was pale, his movements urgent. Ellie, we need to talk. Now! Frank Murphy stepped out from behind the counter, his massive frame blocking Michael's path. Now hold on there, mister. Maybe you should explain to all of us just where exactly you've been for the past 18 years. Michael's jaw tightened as he looked around the room at the suspicious faces surrounding him. This is between my wife and me. Wife? Martha Henley's voice cut through the tension like a knife. As far as this town is concerned, Eleanor Hayes has been a widow for nearly 2 decades. You can't just waltz back in here and claim otherwise. Michael's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or desperation. I never wanted to leave. I had no choice. There's always a choice, old Joe Brennan called out from his corner table. Question is, what kind of trouble were you running from that was worth abandoning your family? The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Eleanor watched Michael's face crumble under the weight of the town's judgment, and despite her own confusion and fear, she felt a surge of protective instincts she thought she'd buried years ago. That's enough, Eleanor said quietly, standing up from the booth. Michael, let's go home. As they walked toward the door together, Martha Henley's voice followed them with poisonous sweetness. Eleanor, dear, you might want to be careful about who you trust. Some men who disappear have very good reasons for staying gone. Eleanor's sister Ruth was waiting on the front porch when they arrived home, her arms crossed and her expression thunderous. At 50, Ruth Winters had always been the protective older sister, but 18 years of watching Eleanor struggle alone had hardened her into a formidable guardian. I heard the news, Ruth said without preamble, her cold gaze fixed on Michael. Half the town is talking about the dead man who came back to life. Michael straightened his shoulders, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. Hello, Ruth. You look well. Don't you dare act like this is some pleasant family reunion, Ruth snapped. Do you have any idea what you put my sister through? What you put Emma through? Eleanor stepped between them, exhausted by the constant conflict. Ruth, please, let's go inside and talk about this calmly. Calmly. Ruth's voice rose an octave. Eleanor, this man abandoned you when you needed him most. You were pregnant, scared, and alone, and he vanished without a word. Now he shows up 18 years later with some story about witness protection, and you're ready to welcome him back with open arms? Michael flinched as if he'd been slapped. You don't understand the circumstances. I understand perfectly, Ruth interrupted. I understand that I'm the one who held Eleanor while she cried herself to sleep for months. I'm the one who helped her through Emma's childhood illnesses, school problems, and teenage heartbreak. I'm the one who watched her wear black to every church service for 18 years, mourning a man who apparently could have contacted her any time he wanted. Eleanor felt tears stinging her eyes as Ruth continued her assault. Ruth, that's not fair. Fair? Ruth pulled a manila envelope from her purse, her hands shaking with anger. You want to know what's not fair? 3 years after Michael disappeared, I hired a private investigator. I wanted closure for you, Eleanor. I wanted answers. She thrust the envelope at Eleanor, who took it with trembling hands. Go ahead. Open it. Inside were newspaper clippings, police reports, and photographs. Eleanor's breath caught as she saw Michael's picture alongside headlines about financial crimes and missing funds. The police suspected him of embezzling money from the construction company where he worked, Ruth said, her voice deadly quiet. The investigation was closed when he disappeared, but the money was never recovered. Michael's face went ashen. Ruth, you don't understand. I understand that my sister deserves better than a man who might be a criminal. Ruth turned to Eleanor, her expression softening slightly. Honey, I know you loved him. I know you want to believe his story. But look at the evidence. Eleanor stared at the documents in her hands, her world tilting on its axis. Michael, she whispered, is this true? That evening, Emma returned to the house with Daniel Brooks, her boyfriend from college, a steady young man studying to be a teacher. Eleanor appreciated Daniel's calming presence during such a chaotic time. The four of them sat around the kitchen table while Michael tried once again to explain his disappearance, but Emma remained skeptical and hostile. So let me get this straight, Emma said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You're claiming you were some kind of undercover hero, working with federal agents to catch the real criminals? I know how it sounds, Michael began. It sounds like a convenient story, Emma interrupted. It sounds like something someone would make up if they needed to explain why they've been gone for 18 years. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Eleanor found herself studying Michael's face, searching for signs of deception. Michael, if you were working with federal authorities, there would be documentation, proof. I can't show you everything, Michael said desperately. Some of it is still classified. But I swear to you, Ellie, everything I did was to protect you and Emma. Protect us from what? Emma demanded. If you were the good guy, what were you protecting us from? Michael rubbed his temples, looking older than his 47 years. The people I was investigating, they had connections everywhere. Police, courts, even federal agencies. When they realized what I was doing, they threatened to kill you both if I didn't disappear. How convenient, Emma muttered. The perfect excuse that can't be verified. Eleanor felt her heart breaking as she watched her daughter's anger battle with her desperate need to believe. Emma, please. No, Mom? Emma slammed her hand on the table. I won't watch you get hurt again. I remember what you were like after he left. I remember you crying when you thought I was asleep. I remember how hard you worked to put food on the table and keep a roof over our heads. Tears streamed down Emma's face as 18 years of buried pain poured out. I remember being 8 years old and asking Santa to bring my daddy home for Christmas. I remember the kids at school asking why I didn't have a father. I remember every single time you had to be both parents because he wasn't here. Michael's own tears fell freely as he listened to his daughter's anguish. Emma, I'm so sorry. If I could have done things differently. But you didn't, Emma said, her voice breaking. You chose to leave us, and now you want us to believe it was all for our own good? The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Emma's quiet sobs. Eleanor reached across the table to take her daughter's hand, but Emma pulled away and ran upstairs to her room. They heard her bedroom door slam, followed by the muffled sound of her phone conversation with someone, probably her roommate at college. Michael buried his face in his hands. I've lost her forever, haven't I? Eleanor looked at the man she'd loved and lost, seeing both the boy she'd married and the stranger he'd become. Michael, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. Were you really trying to protect us? Or were you running from something you'd done? Michael raised his head, and Eleanor saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Ellie, what if I told you it was both? Eleanor stared at Michael across the kitchen table, her heart pounding as his words echoed in the silence. What do you mean, both? She whispered. Michael took a shaky breath, his hands trembling as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn manila folder. I was an accountant at Riverside Construction, just like you remember. But what I discovered there, it changed everything. He opened the folder, revealing official documents with government seals. The company was being used to launder money for a crime organization. Millions of dollars were flowing through fake construction projects. When I stumbled onto it, I had two choices: become part of it or expose it. Eleanor examined the papers, recognizing federal agency letterheads and Michael's signature on witness statements. These look real, she said quietly. They are real. But here's the part I'm ashamed of, Ellie. Before I understood what was happening, I was the one processing those transactions. For 6 months, I unknowingly helped them move dirty money. His voice broke with guilt. By the time I realized what I was doing, I was already implicated. The FBI offered me a deal: help them gather evidence and enter witness protection, or go to prison for financial crimes I didn't even know I was committing. Eleanor felt the room spinning as the truth finally emerged. So you chose to help them. I chose to protect you and Emma from my mistakes, Michael said, tears streaming down his face. But the people we were investigating had connections everywhere. When they discovered what I was doing, they made it clear that my family would pay the price if I didn't disappear completely. Outside, a car door slammed, and both Michael and Eleanor froze. Through the kitchen window, they could see a black sedan parked across the street, the same type Joe Brennan had mentioned seeing at the railroad crossing. They found me, Michael whispered, his face going pale. We need to leave. Now. Eleanor's mind raced as she processed the implications of Michael's revelation. For 18 years, she'd mourned a man who was trying to protect her, but now that same protection might not be enough. Michael, if what you're saying is true, why are they still after you? Because the main case never went to trial, Michael explained, hastily gathering the documents. 3 key witnesses died in what looked like accidents before they could testify. The case fell apart, and the organization stayed operational. They've been waiting for me to surface so they could tie up loose ends. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her eyes red from crying but her expression determined. I heard voices. What's going on? Before either parent could answer, Daniel rushed in behind her, his face flushed with concern. There are men watching the house. I saw them when I went to get something from my car. Michael's jaw tightened with resolve. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Emma, you and Daniel need to leave town immediately. Go back to college and stay there. I'm not leaving, Mom, Emma said firmly. Eleanor felt a surge of pride at her daughter's courage, even as fear gripped her heart. Emma, if your father is right, if he's right, then we face this together. Emma interrupted, moving to stand beside Eleanor. I've spent 18 years thinking my father was a coward who abandoned us. I'm not about to let him face this alone, if he was actually trying to protect us. Michael looked at his daughter with wonder, seeing for the first time the strong young woman she'd become. "Emma, you don't understand how dangerous these people are." "Then explain it to me," Emma said, crossing her arms. "No more secrets, no more lies. If we're family, we face the truth together." Through the window, they could see more cars arriving on the quiet street. Eleanor realized that Millbrook's peaceful facade was about to be shattered, and her neighbors would soon discover that sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. "Michael," she said quietly, "how much time do we have?" Michael checked his watch and peered carefully through the kitchen blinds. "Not much. They're positioning themselves around the house." He turned to face his family with grim determination. "There's something else you need to know. When I entered witness protection, I was given an emergency contact. Agent Sarah Martinez with the U.S. Marshals Service. She's been my handler for 18 years. Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope. Can she help us? If she's still alive, and if her phone number hasn't changed, Michael said, pulling out a prepaid cell phone. The organization we're dealing with has people everywhere, including law enforcement. Emma moved to the window and cautiously looked outside. There are at least 6 men out there now. They're not trying to hide anymore. Michael dialed the number with shaking fingers. After 3 rings, a woman's voice answered. "Martinez. It's Michael Hayes, authorization code Falcon 77. There was a pause, then urgent typing in the background. "Michael, where are you? We've been tracking increased chatter about your location for the past week." "I'm at home in Millbrook with my family. They found us." "Listen carefully," Agent Martinez said, her voice crisp and professional. "There's a federal task force closing in on the organization as we speak. We've been building a new case for the past 5 years, and your testimony could be the final piece we need to put them away permanently." Eleanor leaned closer to hear the conversation. "What does that mean for us?" "It means the danger is real, but it might finally be ending," Martinez replied. "I'm sending backup to your location, but you need to stay put and stay safe for the next 2 hours. Michael's face darkened. "Sarah, I don't think we have 2 hours." As if summoned by his words, the front doorbell rang, followed immediately by heavy knocking. A man's voice called out, "Mrs. Hayes, we just want to talk to your husband. No one needs to get hurt." Emma grabbed Daniel's hand tightly. "What do we do?" Eleanor looked at her family, the husband she'd thought was dead, the daughter who'd grown up without a father, and the young man who'd been swept into their chaos through no fault of his own. For 18 years, she'd been strong enough to raise Emma alone, run a household, and build a life from the ashes of her broken dreams. She wasn't about to let fear destroy the second chance they'd been given. "We don't answer the door," Eleanor said with quiet authority, "and we don't give up." But even as she spoke those brave words, they could hear footsteps moving around the house, testing windows and looking for other ways inside. The sound of breaking glass from the back door sent them all into action. Michael grabbed Eleanor's hand, while Emma and Daniel followed close behind as they rushed toward the front of the house. "The basement," Eleanor whispered urgently. "There's a storm cellar that connects to the Hendersons' yard next door." As they descended the narrow stairs, they could hear heavy footsteps moving through the kitchen above them. Michael's phone rang, and Agent Martinez's voice was barely audible. "Michael, we're 3 minutes out." "Just hold on." In the dim basement, Surrounded by boxes of 18 years' worth of memories, Eleanor made a decision that surprised even herself. She pulled out her own cell phone and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, Eleanor spoke clearly and calmly. "This is Eleanor Hayes at 42 Maple Street. Armed men have broken into my home, and my family is in immediate danger." Within moments, they could hear sirens approaching from multiple directions. The footsteps above them paused, then quickened as the intruders realized they were running out of time. Michael opened the storm cellar doors, and they emerged into the Hendersons' backyard, just as federal agents and local police surrounded the house. Emma turned to watch her childhood home being secured by law enforcement, then looked at her father with new understanding. "You really were trying to protect us, weren't you?" Michael nodded, too emotional to speak. Eleanor took both of their hands as Agent Martinez approached, flanked by other federal agents. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm Agent Martinez. I owe you an apology for 18 years of deception, but I hope you can understand why it was necessary." Eleanor looked at the woman who'd been her husband's lifeline during their separation. "Will this finally be over?" "The arrests we're making today should end this threat permanently," Martinez confirmed. "And Michael, your family's safety is no longer in question. You're free to reclaim your life." As the sun set over Millbrook, Virginia, the Hayes family stood together on their neighbor's lawn, watching their past being carried away in handcuffs while their future stretched out before them like an open road. Emma squeezed both her parents' hands. "So what happens now?" Eleanor looked at Michael, seeing not the broken man who'd appeared in her garden yesterday, but the partner she'd chosen to build a life with 25 years ago. "Now we learn how to be a family again," she said softly. "One day at a time." Michael pulled both women into his arms as federal agents finished securing the scene. For the first time in 18 years, Eleanor Hayes felt truly safe, truly hopeful, and truly ready to remove the black dresses from her closet forever.